Okay, welcome to the ACT guide. This is your wonderful tutor, someone who is not qualified at all to talk about this. But here's a small guide for the ACT going over most of everything. Major disclaimers. Once again, I'm not qualified. I'm not speaking on behalf of the ACT organization or anyone else that could possibly sue me. So that's my disclaimer. Obviously, I'm gonna recommend some sources, but take some of this with a grain of salt. I'm not really a testing prep coordinator or something. This is just a general rundown. You might be asking, why would I ever want to take the ACT? First off, torture. It's 3 hours of your life that you're never going to get back. And then it's also required by North Carolina. So you don't really have a choice of whether or not you want to take the test. But another thing is that a lot of colleges may require the ACT. It's a little complicated nowadays because some colleges are, waiving their testing requirements. Others are requiring it. On the safe side, you want to make sure that you put in enough effort. So if your colleges that you're thinking of applying to require it, that you'll have a, I guess, quote unquote, good enough score. At least something that's hopefully not in the negatives. You can see here in North Carolina, I'm going to link my sources in the description, but only about 41% actually get a 19 or above. Prior to 2020, I believe that the minimum UNC test score that you had to have was a 19. Now they've waived it. They may reinstate it later. We're not entirely sure. But only about 41% actually meet that 19 or above score. So that's just for the context of the state of North Carolina. And you can see here, Duke is actually a private school, but it's very selective. And UNC Chapel Hill is a public school within the UNC system. That's the two scores you're seeing here. Duke, the range of scores is 33 to 35. UNC is a little bit more lenient, or at least according to College Scorecard. Great website. And it's about 22 to 27. This is just to give you a general range of I don't know what these colleges might be looking for. Now, of course, people have, applied to these colleges and gotten in without these scores. But this is just to provide context. And you might be like, why would I care about this? Why Duke and UNC? First off, Duke is providing full rides, or at least you won't have to pay tuition to Duke if you make below $150,000 in North Carolina and South Carolina. So if you don't want to pay for college or you want to get a deep discount, they have programs, financial aid-wise, that if you just gain entry into the college, you're able to automatically get this financial aid. You can also see down here a little, less big, is that if your family income is $65,000 or less, Duke is providing full rides. It means, full tuition, full room and board. That's super awesome, and they'll do so without loans. And UNC Chapel Hill has something quite similar. It's called the Carolina Covenant. This is a very similar program where if you meet a certain income, you're able to get an automatic full ride if you actually get into the college. And I know that paying for college, once again, is a very stressful thing. This is one thing taken off the table when it comes to financial worries. And you might be like, what are the incomes? Just to provide some. If you're a family of 4 and your family makes under $55,000, just entering and getting into UNC Chapel Hill is enough to get you that full ride based upon financial aid. So hopefully you do want to at least shoot your shot at the ACT, take it a little seriously, and hopefully work towards hopefully getting a good score. I'm going to be going over 4 things. First of is what is actually on it. Second is how it's scored. Hopefully how to ace it. And lastly, post-test clarity, or moreover, what you should be doing after you finish the test. Now first, what is on it? They're going to be testing for 2 main things. Number 1 is speed. It's a time test with very strict time constraints, and they just want you to be able to answer questions correctly very fast. And then I guess secondary to that is the actual content. It's mostly going to be going over 9th and 10th grade subjects, maybe a little bit of 11th, but usually it's your first 2 years and all of the material covered in that time. The format itself is about 3 hours long. You'll have 4 sections. First is going to be English, then it's going to be math, then it's reading, and then science. There's also a writing section that like no one cares about. Like I don't want to go like so deep into why you shouldn't care about it, but like it's literally useless. Colleges don't use it. It doesn't impact your score, and it's extra time for something that no one so just ignore like an essay writing portion where you have to like write it down with like a pen or paper. Ignore that. The English section is the first section. You get 75 questions in 45 minutes, giving you about 36 seconds per question. The general content of this section is about grammar, punctuation, and sentence structure. Here's an example question. You can see that it's like, what's the proper placement of this comma? And they underline the section they want you to pay attention to. That's like a general example. Then we have on the second one is the math section. This is 60 questions within 60 minutes, giving you about 1 minute per question. For us, it'll be about math 1 to math 3 content-wise. Leaning more on math 1 and 2. It's covering geometry, some trigonometry, and the thing about the math section is that it gets harder as you go along. So that means like the first question, but easy. The 60th question might be, I don't know, physics. Not actually, but it's gonna be something. So this is like the only one where the questions gradually get harder. Here's an example question, number 1, and you can see that it's just doing some simple y equals mx plus b. Just I'll read through it, all that good stuff. Here is the third section, reading. In between math and reading, you'll actually get a break for like 10 minutes, but the reading section is the third one. You'll have 40 questions within 35 minutes, meaning you get about 52 seconds per question. They'll give you 4 reading passages that each have 10 questions each, and it's just going to be your standard reading questions, you know what I mean? Like, oh my god, what's the theme? Or like, what happened in the story? Or like, why did the author do this one thing in this one paragraph? Here is an example question of what it looks like. It's asking about point of view, that the passage, blah, 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 it doesn't matter. The science section is 40 questions within 35 minutes. Once again, 52 seconds per question. The name is actually quite misleading. The science section actually isn't about science. It's just more about like how fast and how well can you read this study. So they're mostly going to be asking like, interpret this graph or interpret this chart or tell me what this table is all about. You can see here that it's like not even asking about science. It's just literally asking like how many results of the test, and like you don't need scientific knowledge to like count the numbers or guess. I don't know. I guessed a lot on my science section. The actual scoring of the ACT is what we're going on to next. Great shrimp photo. I know. The ACT itself is scored on a scale of 1 to 36, 36 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. Each section is graded separately, so that means you'll get a separate score for each of the reading, math, English, science sections. So that means you can get a 36 in English, a 17 in math, a 24 in reading, and a 29 in science. To also preface again, the writing section has no influence on the score. Once again, most useless section on the ACT, and it's entirely optional. But you know, like all of these sections are scored separately on their own metrics. And that all entirely creates a composite score. You can see, you know, a little bit of math here. Basically, the way that they come up with a composite score, or the general score that most colleges or scholarships will be looking for, it's by adding all 4 sections together into one number. Then they divide that number by 4, and they round it either up or down depending on the value. And with all the previous scores that I just showed, your composite score would be a 24. Really good, above average for North Carolina. So that's great. This is another PSA. The writing portion does not improve the overall score because once again, the writing portion is useless. Everyone hates the writing portion. Boo. This is also to provide some more perspective. The average ACT score for Cumberland County is 17. For the state, it's 18.2. And for our school, it's actually 16. So like, I wouldn't get too in your head about like, oh my god, I got like a 20. It's fine. Even if you don't get like a 17 or you get below that, it's totally cool. Everyone has different strengths, and once again, the ACT is primarily testing for speed. But also like if you end up getting a 28 or a 27, even though that's not a perfect 36, that's still really good. That's a really solid score in the context of our school and also our county and also the state. Anyways, education, not doing the best in North Carolina. But you know, hopefully now you know how to score it. Now you know what's on it. this is my tips of how to ace it. This is like the least qualified part I can give. Like, even though I scored pretty okay on my ACT, I'm not here like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm like in the labs making the ACT questions myself. And also, like, I was there while they were scoring it. And by the way, I got like 17 straight 36 tests in a row. Like, that's not me. Take the resources that work for you, look a bit online, ask a few people. Don't use me as your only source because, look, no. Overall, the best tips of like how to ace the overall test, it's skipping. When in doubt and you don't know a question, skip it. Like, first 30 seconds, if it's not clicking, it's time to go, okay? It's time to abandon that question. And when you end up abandoning questions, as I do a lot of times, you might end up being like at the last like 2 minutes of the test, you have like, what, 20 unanswered questions, and you can't cover all of that. So you know what you're gonna do? You're gonna find a letter and you're gonna stick to it. So you end up just filling in like A for all 20 questions or B for all 20 questions, because it gives you like a better likelihood of getting at least some of those questions right, you know, like on average. Like, it's like how a broken clock is right 2 times a day. Like, even if the clock is broken, you know at least you're gonna get it like something right. And of course, general well-being tips: get a good night's sleep before the test, eat a good breakfast, de-stress. I know it's a very stressful test because of the pacing and also, you know, like the general vibe, but really you work your best when you're relaxed and well mentally. And also another one is practice tests. I did a lot of practice tests before I took my ACT and before I retook it. So during that time, I was able to really get a grasp of the format and also like the kind of questions that they would ask. Now, here's another disclaimer. I would never advise anyone to do any illegal activity. And the message I want to put out is to be like a good, loyal citizen that would never, ever infringe on a testing company's copyright. Because, you know, there was like an entire thing with like a website. It used to be called Crack ACT. And, you know, it just provided like free and accessible ACT tests, just like online, available to be downloaded with PDFs and printed out. Had the answer keys so you can like really refer back to what questions you got wrong, and also the scoring guidelines. It was crazy. I don't know, it was so accessible and it was so online. It was also free. It was such a great alternative to paying like $60 on test prep materials. It was everywhere, but sadly it was taken down. But you know, with the internet, there's always alternatives. There's always a mirror domain or something. So I mean, like, I would never advise anyone to, you know, look on like Reddit, Crack ACT alternatives, or Crack ACT new domain. With that said, I'm now going to be moving on to how to ace the English part. The English is a very long and fast-paced part. My number one thing is know that no change is a valid answer. They're gonna have an option where it's like, don't change the sentence. It is perfectly grammatically correct the way it is, and that is a perfectly valid one. Also another one, I would not advise anyone to actually read the entire passage like in its completion. I would say like maybe read the surrounding sentence of the question, or maybe like reading like the paragraph itself, but reading the entire passage is actually a little like unnecessary. For the general rules and grammar tips, I would actually say that like most articles cover everything you need to know for the exam. Next is the math section that I really have no good advice on. If you don't know a question, don't feel free to skip it. I know it does get harder as you go on, but like it's best to like move past the questions you don't know and just tackle the ones you do, because it's very easy to get stuck on a math problem for like 5 minutes, and that's time burned when you only have 1 minute a question. You can see here I have the how-to dummy books of Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. That's the content that the ACT math section is going to be based on. So I mean, if you want to review that, those are the 2 books I can show you. Generally, any Algebra 2 and Algebra 1 book would suffice. The next section would be reading. Depending on how much time you find yourself left with, if you know that you're a slow reader, I would not recommend you to read the questions before reading, because that just takes up more time. But if you find yourself like you're a very fast reader, you could possibly read the questions, or at least skim over the questions before you actually read, and just like highlight and underline keywords of like the main idea, or like in paragraph 2 and you just circle paragraph 2 to like just make it easier to to reference back. Another thing is that you always want to cross out bad answers. Like, process of elimination, if you cross out 2 answers, then you have a 50-50 chance of getting your question right when you only have 2 options left. Here on the actual resources is a Reddit post. It's a little difficult to provide guidance on this section because it's really reliant on how fast you can read and how well is your reading comprehension, which is not really something you can just like grind out in like a week, you know? And the next is the science section. My biggest tip for everyone and anyone: never read the entire study. Half of that information is going to be irrelevant, and the other half will be a bunch of scientific concepts none of the questions are ever going to be asking on. Go straight to the questions and find whatever information they're asking for. So like, let's say, hey, how many experiments were run? You just look for the experiments run on the table. Or like, hey, on the graph, tell me like the general growth. Is it like growing? Is it decreasing? How is like the sun reacting to the plants? Like, it really is just looking at the data and parsing as much information as you can from it. The study is a context and it's not an actual resource. It might be relevant in some questions because you might just be looking at this graph like, I don't know what any of this means. Briefly look at the study, see what they're talking about, and see what the graphs are doing. Context-wise, there's this book, ACT Science. I can't really provide any context on like how good this resource is. I just looked up online of good resources, and that's the first one that popped up. For me, I just really relied on pattern recognition and finding out what this graph means in this question. And now, hopefully you're after this test, you're like, oh my God, I never want to do that again. Literally me. But it's like, yeah, now what? What do you do after the test? First off, getting your results. Getting your results takes about 2 to 3 weeks, depending. It might change with now the digital test. And now you want to be like, I got my score. Now what? What do you feel about your score? Do you want to aim for higher? Are you good with it? Hopefully you're not going to aim for lower. That would be a weird thing to do. But I mean, to each one's own. Should you retake? Retaking is a very good question. First off, do you want to? If you're like, I never want to take a test like that ever again, like, no, don't force yourself to. Like, you know what? Ugh. And then it's also a reflection on your goals. Are you aiming for Harvard? In that case, you might want to up that score a little bit. But if you're like, I'm actually thinking about doing community college, the ACT score isn't actually as important. Granted, I believe that they may use some standardized testing to waive math requirements or like a reading requirement, but it's not as important. Another thing is test optional policies. A lot of colleges have been waiving testing for 4 years after the COVID-19 pandemic, but now a lot of colleges are going back to the drawing board of saying, do we want to reinstate testing? Maybe also look at the average score versus yours. I think it's very easy for people to like get into the head of like, oh my God, I need to get a 36 and like a perfect score. But like in the context of our school and our county and our state, a 28 is pretty good. Like, not gonna lie, 28 is really solid. And also money. Money is a big part because I know in North Carolina, the first test you take with the state is free. However, any optional retakes you take will possibly cost money. There is fee waivers available for taking the ACT. And when you actually sign up for a fee waiver, you actually get access to free study materials from the ACT company. You can take your practice test and see where you need to improve. You can do all this stuff. It's really great. Definitely don't pay out of pocket for a test if you qualified for something like free or reduced lunch. You can talk to your counselor and see if you qualify. If you know you're going to retake, I would say to take some practice tests. Of course, never, ever, ever take one from a totally illegal copyright infringement website such as crackact.com or something. Like, obviously never do that. But also, you definitely want to see where you can improve on your score. Like maybe it's the content. Like, I didn't know this mathematical concept, but now that I do, I get it and I won't get that question wrong. Or maybe it's timing. Maybe you find yourself often running out of time on the reading section. What strategies can you implement to make sure you get through your questions faster and finish on time? And then also, once again, the internet is your friend. There are subreddits where people will provide feedback on a question you don't understand. I know I used one once on a math problem that I just didn't get. Also, there's plentiful resources on the internet, so always look to that. And now, like, let's say on the flip side of the coin of, hey, I want to retake, it's absolutely not. I don't want to take that test again. First off, good for you. Love that for you. Maybe you need to send the scores, maybe you don't. It really depends. Yeah, I don't really have much advice other than chillax. And then that'll actually be it. As parting words, I hope y'all don't get too caught up in the numbers. Once again, most of North Carolina doesn't score above a 19 anyways. And a shout out to SlidesGo for providing me this theme. Hope you guys all enjoyed this video, and that'll be it.